So hello there. So in this video we'll see how you can actually create a documentation for your project using Doxygen. Okay, so before that what we can do is we can actually create a particular project in the code blocks, complete the coding part of that, then we can actually see or what are the things that you have to do it in the Doxygen in order to make the documentation, and as well as how the particular comments from the code will be taken up by the Doxygen software. So first let's create a particular console application. Say first doxy try test. Let us go with the default settings itself. So now you will have a basically a main file that will print hello world, so, right? So let us try to create an calculator application itself. So basically what I want is I need to have two files. One is the two additional files. One is the .c and the .h file, which will contain the all the operations for that calculator application, and we can keep it as separate. So first one, I'll have an empty file, c file, say operations.c. So the idea is to have a modular coding in which this operations.c will contain all the definition function definitions, and similarly I need to have another file which would be the operations.h, which will contain the function prototypes. Okay, so by default, if we are talking about the calculator application, we would have four operations, that is the int uh, add, say which is the first function, which will take two integers and will return an integer, which is the sum of those two. Then I'll have a sub int int. Again, this third one I can have for the multiplication. Fourth one I can have the function for the division, right? So I saved it. Similarly, in the uh, operations function, what I'll have is basically the function definitions for all of these things. So int add and I just need to return the sum of these two. So similarly I will have the subtract, the multiply and division. So this should be fine. Now I'll have to call your function, the header file here. So I'll have operations.h here. Similarly, if I want to use this particular library or functions in the main, I'll have to include the operations.h in the main file also. So I'll just say %d comma add 10 comma 9, right, and I'll just compile it and run it. So I'll see that okay, this process is successful, I am getting a correct answer, right? So this is your general code. Right now what we'll do is basically we'll have comments for each of the action, and we'll have something called as the file headers, which will tell in this file what are the things that are done, a summary of the all the contents of the file, right? So when we are doing or when we are using Doxygen, what we have to do is you have to reframe this particular comments in such a way that the Doxygen will understand that okay, if at all some content comes between this particular syntax, I have to document it. So there are certain special types of commenting techniques which are very similar to the normal ones itself, that we have to use in order to make the Doxygen parser to extract the information from the code itself. Now, one thing that I will definitely like to have is, particularly when I'm working with a project, I would like to have a main page which will tell what that particular project is all about. So what I'll do is I'll create a empty file which is of the type markdown. So uh, when we are working with, sorry, markdown, yeah, markdown file. So just as you have done with your GitHub files and all, always you can have a readme file. So if I do that, I create a readme.md and that will automatically come in this particular project. Now I have to tell the Doxygen that this is the main page and the main page content should be taken from this. So what I can do is I can give using or use the @main page command followed by, say, the project title or something, my first doxy test. So this will be my title, and I can tell the author is, say, Sharad TV. Then just like your normal what is it, markdown file, this supports all the syntax. So I'll have a level 3 header now, this, and some kind of random description. This test project to demonstrate the usage of Doxygen to for documenting your code, your project. So that should be sufficient enough to give an understanding of what the project is all about. Now similarly, what I can, or what we'll do is now, uh, in the main file itself or in the operations.c, I'll try to have certain comments which can be extracted. So there is two ways in which I can do. I can define or tell what this function does just above it as comments, or I can take write all this what is a function headers, that is what that function does, what are the arguments for those functions, in two places. One is either the .c file where you are defining the whole functions, or in the .h file. Personally, I would recommend you to put it in the .h file, because the .c file for that functions will already be having a lot of content. We do not want to our code and the command to clutter the whole way. So instead of that, typically your .h file will be less cluttered compared to your .c files. So my personal preference is I would keep all these function headers in your .h file. So I'll just start with the first one of the syntax which is recognized by your Doxygen to extract the code. So the first one is /** and the same. Now normally what we use is this for multi-line comments. So in order to make the uh, Doxygen software recognize this as a particular thing to be extracted, we use an extra star. Now again, for each content, that is for each function, I can have a brief description followed by a detailed description of the whole project. Then what are the parameters that I require for that function, and what are the return values for that function. So I'll just kind of copy this functions or arguments here also. This only intention for giving this explicitly is because so that I can mention it in my arguments, that is for documentation. So first one, I can have a brief description. So this add function adds two numbers, then soon as you put a full stop, the second line is automatically taken up as your detailed description. So this is a detailed okay. Next, what I want to do is I want to tell the documentation that what are the parameters that I have for this particular function. So for that I have to use @param followed by the variable name, so where one space, and what is the description of your argument. So this is the first integer for addition. So similarly for the second parameter also I'll do the same, so using the command @param var2. This is the second integer for addition. So similarly our function has a return type also, right? So again for that also I can have the command @return the sum of the two integer arguments. Okay, so we'll just see with this particular file, that is I have a particular main file which gives me a brief overview of what is the project, and in one file, that is the .h file, I have just written one function header for the add. We will see how this particular thing can be extracted using Doxygen. So I'll just open up the Doxy wizard. Okay, so now this is the basic GUI front end for your Doxygen. So there are basically three tabs. One is a wizard, expert and run. So first one, you'll have to select a folder from which you have to basically run this Doxygen. So my preference would be from the code base, that is source code, wherever that project folder is there. So where is it? Coding. Okay, so my application was my first Doxy, right? So I'll run my Doxygen from this folder itself, and the project name I'll better keep it as my same name as my code project name itself. Let's give it as Doxy test. So then you have an option whether you want to select a logo. So what I have created is basically I have just created a random logo from paint, and I have just kept it over there, and I'll select that as my particular logo, project logo. Then you'll have to specify where is the source code which has the comments written in the Doxygen format. So you have option select. So this is my project, so my source code will be here itself, so I'll select this folder, and you have to give the option for scan recursively. This is because if you have an a tendency of creating subfolders, say source folder, if you want the Doxygen to extract the codes in that folder also, then you'll have to click on this scan recursively option. So again, this final option is specify the directory where the Doxygen should put the generated documents. So again, I'll suggest you to keep it in the same project itself, but give another folder called documentation. Then select that folder. So that is all for the first section, that is the project. Now you have another sub tabs like mode, output, diagrams and all, and in mode you since we are working for C, let us optimize for the C output. Okay, then leave the remaining things as such. Then in output we have to make sure that what are the different types of output that you prefer. Say you want the HTML, you want the LaTeX, you want the RTF format or XML or something. For the time being we'll go with the HTML and the LaTeX. The diagrams is basically useful when you have C++, that is class program oops concepts and all. So it shows which all class is derived from which all those inheritance. Those can be easily seen, visualized using these diagrams. For C we just can click on no diagrams and leave it. Then in expert again we have to set certain things. So again in expert you have many sub tabs, which is like say the which is very common in the wizard term itself. So here you can uncheck the full path names, then check the java auto brief java.auto auto brief checkbox. Yes, that's it. So basically if you just hover over this particular names, you can see what that particular means. Description of that particular checkbox or that content will be given here, and which is quite straightforward if you like. Basically java.autobrief is a particular commenting style that that the Doxygen will understand in order to extract it. So we will be using those. So in to make sure that the Doxygen can recognize those comments, you just check it. Then you go to the build option, select the extract all, uncheck show include files. Then there are a few generate options, that is to-do list. So we'll just kind of retain the bug list. Remaining things we don't want to use it. And again we don't want to show used file because it will again kind of populate your documentation unnecessarily. Then we can go for the HTML. Now in HTML basically there are options like how the HTML page that is generated will look like. So there's an option for preview and disable index. Okay, so with this we will try to run our first one. So the Doxygen says it's finished, so we'll just click on the show HTML output. You can see those things. Okay, I just made a mistake here in the show file option. So if you refresh it, you will see the file list also. So in my file list I have the main file, that is my main page, which is my what you're seeing in the first page itself. Then you have the main.c. It will show what are the functions in that particular file, what is the function definitions. Then we have the operations.c, in which it will show your all the function definitions. Similarly in the .h file. So now we can see we had written the code or the comment for your add function, right? So if I take back this, so you can see this brief description is given as this add function adds two numbers. So again, this is your brief description, that is it will be shown here itself in the function list itself. If you want to see the detailed descriptions, if you click on the more option, it will go down to that whole particular file function definition documentation, and you will see the detailed descriptions. Similarly parameters, it will highlight as variable 1, this is the first integer for addition, variable 2, this is the second. So this is how your basic HTML of HTML of the documentation will look like. Now if you go to that particular folder, say this is the particular folder that I have created for my project. In documentation I'll have two options. One is the HTML, I'll just close it, HTML, and another one is a LaTeX. So in HTML, if you go with index.html, you will get the same file. Okay, now going to the LaTeX version, you have one file called as the roughman. So if your system is already having a text compiler as well as the text studio editor, it will open up in the text studio. You can open this in the text studio and you can just run this. So once it shows that process exited normally, you can scroll down and see your whole code. So you can see this is the file name itself. So automatically it populates a table of index page, and you can kind of click and go and see. So this will automatically get populated and we can directly use these things. Now this is just, once you run the LaTeX, it will generate that particular file in PDF format and it will be in the same directory itself. So the refman was my text file, so the PDF will have the same name, which is called as the text refman.pdf. So if I scroll down, you will have the neat documentation for the whole thing, and the parameters will be automatically tabulated. You don't have to worry about anything. So that is the basic step for creating a documentation using Doxygen. So we will now see, we'll go into a little more different options on how we can do the commenting in your code. So this is one method of code, commenting your codes. Second method is something like triple slash. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this here itself. Okay, normally double slash is your single line commenting method. You just have to add one more line in order for the Doxygen to identify it. So again, this I'll just make the modifications for this. So this sub function subtracts. So I'll have the detailed description. So similarly, the parameter, I can have the first integer for subtraction. The return will be the difference of the two integers. Now we'll have a small variation, that is if you talk about the arguments, I have two input arguments and one return output arguments, right? So what I can do is, instead of writing as returns and all, can also write it as param in. So it tells the Doxygen that it's a parameter that is taken as an input, and this one will give out that particular return particular variable. So here I can say mention like diff or something. So if I write like this and run my Doxygen again and generate my HTML, if I go and look at the operations.h, you'll see that even then my Doxygen recognize that. So for add I have written it as just where1 where2, whereas I have used the parameters in and out for in the subtract function. Still I was able to write or document it and make the Doxygen extract it from my comments itself. So what I'll do now is basically populate the whole uh, functions. So I'll copy this type of format also for multiplication, and I'll just modify this multi. This is ready for okay. This would be like the product. So for division divs function, so this would be like the reminder. Okay, so that should be it for my particular function prototypes. So all my commenting for the function headers will be put in my function my header file .h files, so that the .c file remains as neat as possible. So if I run my Doxygen again, wait until the whole process is finished, and I just go to my HTML and refresh it, I should have, say, my normal file itself. I have not made any changes in that. So if I click on the files option, I'll have the file list. In that, if you click on the .h or .c file, both will have the same things. So you can see the brief description will be given here itself in the function list. If you click more, it will directly take you to the function documentation. So it tells you what is that function doing, what are the parameters it want, and what will be the return type. So we have seen two different methods in which you can actually document the functions. Now what I want to say, when I click on these files, there are a list of files coming, right? But there is no description on this brief description for this particular files. So we'll see how we can add the file headers. So I have my .h file. So this is where I'll write my file headers. So I can use @file, and I have to give the name of the file for which I am writing as the argument itself. So I'm working for the operations.h file. So if I use the @file instruction or syntax command, followed by, it should be the file name correctly. So after that, I'll have the brief description, the function prototypes, types, then I can have details of, like, say, author, TV. Then say if my particular code is having some kind of bugs, I can mention it here itself. Say no bugs this function, save it, then I'll just copy this and do the same for your .c file, but change the name here, function prototypes definitions. Yes, okay, so again copy, and for the main file also I'll do the same. So, but make sure you change the name, the function file headers as the correct name. Okay, so this would be like, say, the application code. For the timing, let's keep something, say some bugs are there in this file. So now what we have done is actually kept file headers for all the 3 files. Okay, now we'll run the Doxygen again. Refresh my HTML page. So now you can see this brief description that I gave comes here itself, right? So if I click on this, it will go to my that particular file. So I have the details. Now I have the detailed description now here, the function definitions, followed by author, bug list, and after that you have the function documentation and so on. Okay, so next, if you see, you can check on the all the 3 particular files, you will have the same response. Now we'll see few more features of for coding or documenting my code. That is, say, in this particular function implementation of div, I have not considered that, okay, say there is an issue like if the 2 numbers are integer, there is a chance that the return type might be float, right? So I have not considered that also. So what I can make is I can make a note or to the user saying that I have not considered that. So I can use same at note, please take care of the input argument types. So if I run this, we'll see what that makes or what those brings about the changes in your HTML. So we made the change in divisions or divs function. So if I go on the operations.h, on the divs function, you can see one yellow colored highlighted note, right? So it is basically to bring the attention of the person who is reading it. Now similarly in the code, I can have certain conditions which must be mandatorily taken care. Say if I want to warn my user that while using this particular code, you should not give floats as your arguments. Say divs won't work properly if floats are given. Similarly, I can have some kind of something to bring the attention of the user. This is something need to take care. So if I save it and run my Doxygen again, we'll see those particular things that is written after the warning and attention will be highlighted in a different color. Again, we have implemented that for the divs function only, so you can see there is a note which is something like, say, even if you do not take care of it, somehow it will function, but whereas a warning as well as this attention are much more severe, so that is why it's highlighted in the red color. Now if I want to say if particular the person who is using with divs function, I want them to check out some other function also, because there is a similarity in the implementation of that file. So I can use at c followed by say add comma sub. Now if I run Doxygen, it should create and automatically create a link to those particular functions. So if I scroll down to the divs function, now you can see there is a link sort of thing, that is C. Also I have written add and subtract, right? So if I click on the add, it will take to that. Similarly, if I click on sub, it will go and highlight this thing. Similarly, if I want the user to check some other file, say main.c, I can make them do that also. So again at c main.c. Make sure these names are exactly the same as you have given in the project. Then run Doxygen, refresh your file. Yes, okay, so you can see there is main.c is again added. So if I click on that, it will automatically take to that particular file. Now we'll see how global variables can be extracted from the code. So I'll go to the main function and just create some global variables. Okay, so some string Doxygen test. Okay, so this is a particular global variable that I want to document in my code. Okay, so the way I can do is using the triple slash itself. So this is a global string. Okay, if I run my Doxygen now, and see the HTML output, the global variable that I had created was in the main.c. So you can see additional tab like variables it is given, and I have a variable documentation here which says, say, the char pointers, some string, Doxygen test, and this is a global variable. Similarly, I can make use of this sort of documentation method for say your macros. So if I have hash define pi is equal to 3.14, similarly hash define some other macro as 1 2 3. So if I want to extract this kind of macros, I can use this particular syntax, that is the normal slash double star followed by star slash, but in between I can have a less than symbol. So this is like mathematical symbol or macro. Similarly, I can have another form which is your triple slash followed by the greater than or less than, sorry, another way for writing comments for macro. Okay, so if I run my Doxygen, all these two macros will be documented as a separate, and the global variable will be again documented as a separate entity. So you can see macro definition documentation. So I have the pi, which is hash defined 3.14 with the description here, some other macro which is the second macro that I defined, and its description, and finally you have the variables here. So I'll just kind of create a few more variables. This is a global integer int globe is equal to 10. Similarly, I'll create few global variables in your .c file also, operations.c also. Fine, so now let's run my Doxygen and refresh the output. So I'll just close this and open it once again. So there you have it, my HTML with a tree view in which I can see the file list, which will tell me what are the files, what is each file supposed to do. So if I individually, if you will have another option for the globals, which will list you all the variables, definitions, hash defines and all. So, and with along with some links to that. So if I'll go to the functions, sorry, file list, functions.h. So I have the function list, detailed description of that particular file, function documentation, individual documentation for those, and you can have links to other pages or even other functions. So this is the HTML view. So if you are creating a website on your own, you can just take this HTML and link it, or if you want to have the PDF, so again, this is my project doc folder. I have the documentation folder in which you will have the output of your Doxygen, and I have the LaTeX. Open your roughman text file in Text Studios. Click on this build and view option. Wait until it says process exited normally. So you will have the updated one. So just close it and open the PDF. So this PDF will have the whole documentation for the project. Okay, so you have the bug list. So for each file, whether you have any bug or not, you can see it here. Similarly, you can have the file index, operations.h. This is the operations.h file. So the function list, what are the functions that you have defined, or what are the functions associated with that particular file, the detailed description of that particular file, this the file header, then each functions, the function headers that you have written for each function definitions. So you'll have the description here, brief description followed by the detailed, the parameters as a tabular column, the return type, and so on. So if you had used that parameter in and out, it will come like this. So you have an additional column. Similarly, you have note, warning, attention. The link for those add sub still works in your PDF also. So you have in the PDF you have macros defined. So again those will be listed. And finally you have the documentation, everything in one simple PDF. Okay, so this particular file, that is for each project as a programming assignment that I give, I would require this particular rough or say PDF, final generated PDF, to be attached to your Git submissions. So that's it, and thank you.